Hello and welcome to PMP Live. I'm Alan Watke, an event coordinator with Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us in this new format where we continue to bring you the authors you love and their new books to the Politics and Prose community. Below, if at any point during the reading, if you want to ask a question, you can click on the Ask a Question button, and then you can upvote those to see the ones that you want to hear the most. With our stores physically closed, it's these online purchases that is going to keep us going. So this this purchase, Little Family by Ishmael Beah, right at the bottom of the screen, that green button will take you directly to our Politics and Prose website. And you know, it's these purchases that will just open our doors back open. Tonight, unlike our in-person events, the author, the host, and the moderator cannot see you. So please feel empowered to just stay in your PJs without judgment. Finally, we want to thank you all for being here with us tonight. We're so thankful to our family of loyal customers, keeping our business and our spirits afloat. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome Ishmael Beah to PMP Live, celebrating his much anticipated second novel, Little Family. Beah gained international acclaim with his New York Times bestselling memoir, A Long Way Gone, an unforgettable account of his years as a child soldier in Sierra Leone. In his new novel, he continues his exploration of the uneasily twinned themes of childhood and survival with the story of 5 young people in a torn and uncertain country. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine, Time Magazine, The Guardian, among many others. And Ishmael was appointed UNICEF's first advocate for children affected by war. And he has also founded the Ishmael Beah Foundation, dedicated to helping children affected by war reintegrate into society and improve their lives. Beah will be joined in conversation by Reza Aslan, a renowned writer, commentator, professor, Emmy-nominated producer, and scholar of religions. A recipient of the prestigious James Joyce Award, Aslan is the author of 3 internationally best-selling books, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth. And so now it is my pleasure to welcome to your screen with PMP Live, Ishmael Beah and Reza Aslan.
All right. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you to Politics and Prose, one of my absolute favorite bookstores in America. I'm sure Ishmael feels exactly the same way. He and I both have had a long experience of doing readings there. I just want to double what Alan said, which is that times like these, it's very important that we continue to support not just all of our local businesses, but particularly our independent bookstores. And Politics and Prose is one of the best. So please, either now, during this conversation, after the conversation, at any time, push that purchase Little Family button and support your bookstore, support Ishmael. It's a fantastic book. I have been reading it pretty diligently for the last couple of weeks, and I got to say, I love this book. It's a intimate story. It's about a group of individuals who form this kind of nuclear family, the spontaneous family, and then also the sort of the world in which they live in this kind of unnamed African country. But more importantly, as I was just kind of telling Ishmael, there are parts of this book that read like a thriller, that you're just, you're holding your breath in some of these scenes. It feels like you're reading some kind of, John le Carre novel or something. And that really speaks to the talent that Ishmael has. Ishmael and I have been friends for 10 years, and I'm just absolutely ask a few questions. There's a little button there that says ask a question. Make sure to ask your questions too. I'll get things started, and then I'll start asking some of your questions as well. And maybe we'll get some readings from Ish as well. But in the meantime, hello, Ishmael. How are you, man?
I'm doing very well, Reza. Thank you. Thank you. I'm great.
Congratulations on a marvelous book.
Thank you.
I want to ask one sort of general question, then I'll ask a specific question. But generally speaking, you became famous for a memoir, a work of nonfiction. This is now your second novel. Can you talk a little bit about, craft-wise, sort of what the difference is between writing a work of nonfiction and writing a work of fiction? Does it require different parts of your brain? Do you feel like you are writing different kinds of genres? What goes through your head as you're crafting a fictional story as opposed to a story that's based on your own life and your own experiences?
Well, that's an interesting question. I want to start by saying thank you to Politics and Prose and all the independent bookstores that are really supporting writers, and to all of you who are joining. There are things that you could have been doing with your time, so we appreciate that you're with us. To answer the question directly, is that my first book was a memoir, and it was actually a story that I was afraid to write. I knew the story. I did not necessarily need to think about it and go to an imaginative space for it. I was just afraid to go to the story itself. So the only familiarity with that in writing fiction is more structure. I believe that every story has a natural structure that the writer has to find in the course of writing the story itself. Now, I love writing fiction more than nonfiction because I come from a part of the world where everybody believes that truth is not singular. When you write nonfiction, everybody holds you to the singularity of truth. So I did not like that. And so writing fiction, I can create a world. I can play more with language, play more with imagery. For example, with this book, it started by really observing the relic of a plane in Lunge Airport in Sierra Leone when you land. And I saw it in this foliage, and I thought to myself, it would be interesting to write a story about 5 characters, which is what Little Family is about, who have kind of, for various reasons, ostracized from society as it is, and have embarked on finding a version of freedom for themselves. And through that, they've created this bond with this new family that they've created, that basically they've created their own rules of equality, but they have to reach at the edges of society itself. So they go into society. So you have 3 boys that are very intelligent, but also very street savvy. You have 2 girls, one who is kind of growing into a woman, so she has to grapple with her femininity. And it's just your observation. These young people are like economists, they are scientists, they are philosophers in this little world, in this little family they've created for themselves.
Well, so on that note, just real quick, I wonder, are there aspects of your own experience growing up in Sierra Leone, your own memories, that sort of worm their way into this fictional story? Are there parts of this novel or memories that you yourself have?
No,
I mean, yeah,
think
besides seeing the carcass of the plane.
Yeah, what it is more it's based on a question that I started asking myself, and the question was, what is freedom on the African continent in any given country? Hence, the location of the narrative itself is not specified because of that, because this could be anywhere really on the African continent. So I wanted to ask the question: how do you define freedom as a young person growing up in any given African country today, and how do you sort of where do you find yourself between the pool of tradition that that have been tested and do not work anymore, but also the imposition of other ideologies from the West, from other things? Where do you find yourself? How do you define yourself? What do you do if you want to be free on your own terms? So that was the question. And from that question, I started to look deeply into the places I've been and start creating characters, observing a lot of things around me, and anywhere in the African country is a very colorful place. If you have the king observation, you walk down the road 2 minutes, you would see the Elimanes in this book, you will see the Kudimatas, you will see the Namsas, remarkable young people these are also names that are not popular in literature. So to answer your question, Reza, part of me writing is also to have names or similarities to who I used to be in literature. I want the Mohammeds and the Suleimans and the Namsas and the Kudimatas in literature, not just the Johns and the other people, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. The book starts with this very interesting prologue. I have a question for you about it, but it's a very short sort of opening. But maybe before I ask the question, would you do me a favor? Would you read a little bit of that for us first?
Absolutely. It's a very short thing. So I'll read the whole thing. So this is the beginning of Little Family. It starts. If you are to walk toward a field that lies at the edge of the small town of Foloya, when the sun is awake in the sky, you will hear the breeze whistling through the grasses, parting the dry green strands as it makes its way to you. Or maybe you will think it is the rustling of someone hiding under the vast shrubs. At the end of the field, your eyes will light upon the face of a boy among the grasses, peering intently at something. You try to see what it is by following the trail of his gaze, but you see nothing. Hello, you say. The boy does not respond, only narrows his eyelids against the wind. You stare back at his face, in which youth is steeped in something serious and old, in stories you want to know. You try your luck again. Good morning. You do not know what else to say. Caution trumps curiosity. You sense that you should not move closer. He does not respond. In fact, nothing about his demeanor suggests that he is aware of your presence. Your eye search his face one last time, then you give a sigh and continue on your way. Yet, as you go, you glance back, still hopeful of an answer. And then, just as you have given up and turned your full attention to the road ahead, you hear him whistle. Immediately, several answering whistles fill the air. You become confused. Should you move on ahead or go back to the boy? You are more aware of your fear now, but at the same time, your belly burns with cautious excitement. You do not know which feeling to pursue. While you hesitate, the shrubs begin a vigorous dance. But when you look again to where the boy was sitting, he is gone, without your having heard him leave. You set aside your fear and try all the pathways that are visible to you, but none goes any distance. Each time, you find yourself returned to where the boy was sitting, the smaller plants stretching to regain themselves in the wake of his human weight.
So the question that I have for you, and as readers will know, the whistling is kind of an allusion to the way in which this little family, these 5 individuals, communicate with each other occasionally. But I'm curious about the decision to open this book with this short prologue that's written in second person. Why is it written in second person? What are you trying to do to the reader by beginning this narrative journey in the second person?
Well, I think what it's very simple. What I'm trying to do, I think, what I'm really trying to do is to.
Did I stump you?
Yeah. What I'm trying to do is to invite the reader into the space, this landscape where these characters inhabit, which is an old airplane, a relic of their country's past and history that they have created a home in. You know, that's sort of adorned with foliage. And but what I'm also trying to do is that the way they live, these young people, is also trying to make sure that there's no intrusion into this world that they've created. So this opening really shows if a curious passersby was to be interested in sort of inviting themselves to the lives of these young people, you will not be able to until they allow you to do so. So basically that opening shapes it and present it that way so that you're told there are things here that you may want to know, but you're going to be invited on the terms of these characters, on the terms of the world that they live in. So hence, if you search to find them your own way, you will not, because they are not interested in an invitation that's unsolicited. So that's kind of really the technique I used. So when you read it as a reader, you already say, well, I want to know where this boy has gone to. Well, who is he whistling to? Where is he going? I want to find him. And that's the trick. That's the reason why I did that. Yeah.
I love it. It's such a intriguing way to start the book, and it does exactly what you say. It prepares you for the experience of being just on the outside of this core group of kids who have created this family, and who are extremely protective of one another,
Absolutely.
and extremely wary of any kind of outsiders, right? And so
Mhm.
it preps you as you say, as one of those outsiders, you know,
Mhm.
who
Mhm.
is only allowed to experience what the group wants you to experience. And in this way, that theme that you had originally talked about, the idea of freedom,
Mhm.
is explored, because for these five characters, the notion that what they are experiencing is a form of freedom is ever present. Not to give too much of the book away, but a chunk of it takes place during this fictional country's Independence Day.
Mhm.
And there's all this commentary, this like sarcasm and satire by the population, including the members of the little family, about the nonsense
Mhm.
of what Independence Day actually is, what the government wants you to do to celebrate it, and how the people themselves view it. You spoke about the notion of what freedom means for young people in Africa, but I wonder what in this book, with regard to that theme of freedom, is can be absorbed by people in the U.S., in North America, in Europe, young people who are in a completely different social context, obviously, as the members of this little family in this fictional African country, but who are very much dealing with many of the same issues spiritually, emotionally, politically, even nowadays. Um, tell me what the true value, the true lessons of what these kids represent when it comes to the idea of freedom can be for people who don't live in Africa.
Well, you know, when before this book was due to come out, and we have the pandemic, and you know, we had a discussion whether we should push the release or not, and we agreed that it should come out because of how relevant it is to today. Like, we are all forced to be indoors and create our own little families and enjoy them, and basically redefine our value system, our lives, what we hold dear to survive the circumstances we're dealt with beyond our imagination, which is exactly what these five young people were going through. So that is the lesson there. I think everywhere in the world, we're always seeking the same thing. In the ways we seek them will be different because of the location where we are, how we go about things. And for a while, I was one of those writers who's always trying to open a small window into this reality of how fragile life can be, but also how important it is to bond to survive it when that fragility occurs. And a lot of people would probably think that, oh, well, you know, this will never happen there, but here we are. So, you know, so basically this book would offer is those very lessons that family, it's not just blood. Family, throughout every course of each individual's life, you bond and create little families to achieve a certain goal. If you have a project, you bond with a few people because you have similar values to achieve that project. You want to start a company, you find like-minded people to bond together, so you create a little family. So I'm trying to show that this is universal. Their circumstances may be different in the sense of where they are, but young people everywhere are disgruntled with governments, with politics, with whatever, and it's become even more so more present now than ever. So I think this book rings through that. You know, it's kind of uh, interesting that it's coming out at this particular time, because any other time it would have been harder for me to explain that. But now everybody gets it. But it also shows not only how you create that bond, but in the midst of those whatever is unfolding, how you behave, sort of, and what you do determines the outcome of that as well, which
Mm-hmm,
is what we're
mm-hmm.
all going through right now. So the little family is very protective. They have devised their own code so that they can go out. They were doing social distance in India. When they go out to walk together, they are not.
That's right.
Yeah, Exactly. When they
That's
go
right.
out
They
to
always
walk.
stay. They always stay like at 6, 7 feet apart anyway, because they don't want anyone to know that they're a unit. Because if they're a
Exactly.
unit, then it'll create attention. So they communicate silently. They stay apart. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
absolutely. So even when this whole thing happened, I was looking at the book. I was like, wow, these are those moments as a writer, Reza, you relate to this when you've created something out of imagination, out of observation, and it happens, and you're like, well, maybe other people were writing through me, but I like it,
Yep.
whatever it is that happened.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah.
Well, I'm curious about something. I've known you for, like I said, a really long time, long before you had an actual family of your own,
Mm.
and now, of course, you have your amazing wife Priscilla. You have beautiful kids. I'm curious how the experience of having your own family
Mhm.
um, was sort of reflected in this book with this kind of made up family, this cast of characters that are sort of all coming from different places and looking for the thing that everyone needs in a family: love, safety,
Mhm.
security, the ability to be yourself. Now
Mhm.
you have your own family.
Yeah.
Did it affect the way that you wrote? Did it affect the themes that you covered in this book, and how?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, first of all, logistically speaking, when you become a parent, your life changes. When I was a young man, I didn't have children. I had the luxury of waking up in the morning and pretend to be this artist. I have coffee, go for a walk. But
Yeah,
even in
yeah,
logistics, I know if I have 2 hours, I only have 2 hours to write something. So
yeah.
I'm more efficient actually just by that itself. But going back to Little Family, when I was writing it, there were aspects of it, certain characters like Kudimata, that basically were informed by my first daughter, Kema. And we were on a boat, my daughter and I, and my wife Priscilla. We were going from Gorée Island in Senegal to Dakar, the capital. And she was about a year old. And there were these, young men and some older men sitting across from us, and we were basically asking out loud, like, how come you guys haven't pierced her ears? So we immediately know she's a girl. She looks like a girl, she has long hair. And I remember how that disturbed me tremendously as a man, but also as a father, that what business is there for a man to
Right.
determine how a woman should express who they are as a girl, as a woman. So when you read Kudimata, you see she's unapologetically who she wants to be. She wants to be her own woman the way she wants to be. And you observe her sort of embracing her femininity the way she wants to be without anybody defining that for her. So that was a reaction. That character actually came out of that particular. So when
Mhm.
I observe my children, I want them to grow up to be this cosmopolitan young African woman who is powerful, intelligent, strong, beautiful, observe themselves in certain ways. So that's how the character came about, really. So I was observing them. I was thinking to myself, what character would I write that if my daughters would read it, they would think, I want to be like that young
Yeah.
woman. So that was informed by that, really.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that actually brings me to my next question. That you do enter the points of view of all five of these characters, but it's really Kudimata,
Mhm.
Kudi, as she's known in her nickname in the book, who I don't know if I mean it would be incorrect to say that she's the main character. And I don't know say that, but she's the one that I feel like you spend the most time living inside of her brain, and
Absolutely.
she really sort of carries this narrative, forward. And she faces some really interesting life choices. Again, I don't no need to get into the plot of that, any of that stuff. But the question that I do have for you is, were you nervous at all about the idea of writing so deeply and with such empathy in the point of view of a woman? I mean, is that something that made you pause at all, or did you just sort of plow forward?
Well, for many years, for my first book, for example, I decided not to write from the point of view of a woman for my first book because I didn't know what that felt like. But when I became a father, I started to observe what girlhood is like. So I thought, I give it a try in this particular characterization. But Kudimata's character is very strong in the book, as you said, because she's also sort of the mother of the family. You know, she looks after them, but also she has to grapple with how she wants to be as a woman, which I think is something that's very common with every woman all over the world. You know, how you take care of those you love, but also how you take care of yourself as a person. And so I was also envisioning those struggles that would happen between my daughters when they grow up, but not to give one for the other, you know, like you can do both, or if anything, you pick yourself more, you know, in a way, as a woman, you know. So I was thinking of those things, but also it's through her that we get to see the other side of Africa that people don't see as much, which is these really well-to-do young people coming from remarkable families, well-traveled, educated, that her
Beautiful
life
people.
had intersected, the beautiful people. And she wants to be like them, but also she wants to maintain certain aspect of how sort of raw she is in a way, and how she
Yeah.
controls that, you know. Now that being said, I was scared of my mind when I had to write from the perspective of a woman. I realized something very quickly. You know, I always grew up thinking that, you know, I did not know about women. I did not fool myself, but I thought I had a little bit of understanding. And I realized writing this book that I had no understanding whatsoever, you know. So my wife, who is usually my first reader, will read something and she'll say, a woman would not say that or think that way. You know, I mean, really? No, you know. And I'm also lucky that my editor, Rebecca Sellington at Riverhead, is a woman. So I was surrounded with remarkable, strong women who gave me the sort of feedback that required me to really go back and undo my own masculinity in a way to be able to
Mm-hmm.
write this character. And that,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that alone made me grow as a writer, in the sense that I had to live in the mind and in the body of this woman. I even had to do research about how you talk about women's clothing. I never thought about that. You know, how do you describe what a woman's wear?
Mm-hmm.
So I was on the fashion magazines, sort of trying to figure out, how do you call a dress that has this or that, you know. So it was quite a learning experience. Now if my daughters ever come to me and say, oh, I want a dress, I was like, oh, you want this dress,
Yeah,
you
you
know?
got it.
So,
Exactly.
so everything that you
Um,
writes you as well, you know? So that's what it is, you know?
right. Yeah. I'm gonna open it up to the questions from the viewers in a moment. There's a couple already. Please feel free to add your questions. I'll make sure to get to as many as I possibly can. And please push that blue button that you see that says "Purchase Little Family." Help out the Politics and Prose bookstore, and I guarantee you it's a wonderful book. Also, what the hell else are you doing right now? Just sit at home and read. You need new books. All right, this is a good one. One question I want to ask before we go on. There's the little family here. They have this kind of unwritten code amongst them, which is you don't talk about your past, right? You
Mm,
don't.
mm,
Every one of them has a very deep, very complicated backstory, and in some cases, there's hints to it, right?
mm,
There are hints to it back and forth, and everyone also seems to know the sort of basic outline of each other's story, but no one wants to talk about it, and more interestingly, no one wants to hear about it.
mm.
And I wonder what that says about some of these sort of post-colonial African states that you have written about, that you've lived in, like Sierra Leone, about this notion of the disappearance of the past. Is there a larger point, a larger metaphor that you are making in the way that these characters deal with their past that can be applied to the countries in this part of the world?
Well, I was writing this book. I lived in Sierra Leone. I was in Abuja, in Nigeria. I was in Senegal. I was in Mauritania. So I
Mhm.
wrote it in very different African cities, you know. And so I was observing. And one of the things I wanted to do is that when people are struggling, they know they are struggling. They don't need to be told that you're hungry. You know you're hungry. It's irrelevant. Nobody can, you know. So what I was trying to do also is that when I was building these characters, Elimane, for example, I wanted to show through his actions presently what his past is without me having to go into the past. I feel like that kind of, you know, some people use it as a device, but it becomes too heavy. I also wanted to trust the intelligence of my readers, to be curious enough to open an imaginative space for them to imagine what the backstory is. So the story becomes theirs as much as it is the characters and the writer, right? So if I had tied everything nicely together, then what would you? So I wanted to leave it open-ended with certain things, but also how they behave. For example, Elimane reads a lot. And I make the point that he reads with the effortlessness of somebody who has not acquired the skills later in life. So you already know that he's privileged. He grew up privileged because
Right.
only having books at home at that age in that setting, you know. So I didn't have to say, well, he was privileged, his family had books. You already got that from his actions in the present. It goes for the rest of them, you know, because also all of them have come from struggle. They don't need to remind each other about it. They need just to be sharp to survive the present. And how they react in the present again foreshadows who they are, where they've come from. So you kind of go into this interesting resistance almost from going into their past. But towards as you get into the book, you realize that you don't even need it because you're invested so much in who they are as people, in what they're dealing with, that becomes irrelevant to some extent, really, whether you have enough of their past to be invested in them. You see how they react in the present, you know. So that says everything about their past, you know.
And it only continues this idea of the reader as an observer, as an outsider. Sort of, you know, we don't get in to know the things that only this group knows, right? It's sort of their secrets, their identity, the things that keep them safe and secure from the rest of the society in which they live. You as the reader are also the outside looking in a little bit.
Exactly, but it also even shows the other characters in the book, like the larger society that they access, is also like the reader. So they go in, they live at the edge of this society. They go in, they observe people because people look at them and almost don't think that they exist. They are able to hear what people fear, what people's dreams are. People are vulnerable around them because they don't think they're intelligent enough to apprehend or understand anything that's going on. So in a way, they gain access to the reader as well as you're reading them, just as they're gaining access to this society that they're kind of living at the edge of, you know. And actually, before I wanted to just maybe perhaps if I could read just a little bit from Kudimata, since we talked about her. And this would be actually in chapter 2, just to sort of give you a little bit about who this young woman is, and then we continue on. So usually, Kudimata made her visits to the market between dawn and the first appearance of the sun. There was a pause that came at this hour, a sigh, when the awakening had to decide whether to spend their day being useful or being destructive. Raffia bag strung over her shoulder, beanie on her head, this bright-eyed young woman of 18 with smooth, sharp cheekbones chose to remain suspended between the two, as her circumstances dictated. Besides, she was drawn to the hidden beauty of this dilapidated place, which painted over whatever bad memories troubled her mind, with the simple and intriguing brushstrokes of all that was on display. She glided among the traders, listening and watching as they called out to the passers-by, letting them know what they wanted, what was essential for them to purchase. Madam, I have a special gift for your lovely daughter. Or Mister, don't you want to go home with a gift that says what doesn't exist in words? I have just that for you. The merchants had sweet words for almost everyone. But when Kudimata passed before them, they said nothing. It was as if she did not exist. She was not invisible. People's eyes caught sight of her, but somehow she was forgotten as soon as she was glimpsed. Kudi did not mind. Because of her invisibility, people spoke honestly around her about their fears, hopes, and dreams. Sometimes she picked up important information that way, information that made it possible to continue to live at the edge of the lives of such people. Some mornings, she simply lingered upon their faces, living in the emotions that they wore, some exceptionally happy, some pensive, some unthinkably sad. Imagine their lives help her to stay suspended between being useful and being destructive, while turning to advantage everything that happened. So again, in a way, as I was saying, I think we find this again, another commonality you asked earlier. I want to share. We find this everywhere in the world, where based on where you're coming from, you are invisible to some people. They may not necessarily want to even hear what your opinion is, almost as if maybe intelligence or certain kind of living is tied to you, who you are, where you're born, where you come from, right? So in this book, I'm really sort of challenging that to show that, yes, you can be intelligent over there, and these kids may have decided to live away from society, but they will outdo you. One of them, Elimane, he's a Shakespeare guy. He comes up with codes that are Shakespearean, And so I wanted to show people to take people to unexpected places through these characters that you don't expect. You read them, you think they're just these ordinary kids, and they are in a lot of ways, but they also aren't in certain ways, just like all of us. So sort of this multi-layeredness of these individuals, really, So yeah.
Well, speaking of those characters, Abiola Johnson has a question for you. She wants to know, first of all, are the characters based on any actual people that you know? You kind of mentioned a little bit about that, but if you want to talk about that a little bit. But more importantly, I think the question that she asks is, what do you hope that readers who may or may not be familiar at all with African culture take away from this book?
Well, I think even though the narrative is set in Africa, and it is an African story, it's also a human story. So you don't need necessarily to be an African person or know about Africa to understand these characters and their struggles. I think all of us have the same desires, the same ways we want to live. All of us want some kind of freedom, want to make some kind of choice that works for us. So all these things are very common in the book. So when you follow them, first, you'll be introduced to a very sort of interesting landscape, but who they are and what they do, how they think, how they feel, will be very similar to the things that maybe you may have thought about but did not speak loudly about in public, or other things like that. Or maybe you may not have thought about certain things, but you realize, you know what, I never thought that way, but that is a good way to think about a certain situation. So it's a human story. Even though it's set in Africa, it's something that you don't need the background of African history to understand anything that's going on. You will read it and you'll be introduced to them on your own terms. And yeah. And again, I didn't answer the second part sorry, Reza, that most of the characters are not based on any individual that I know. Is based on a composite of people I observe and imagination. But some of the names come from places I'd lived while writing it. For example, Elimane and Kudimata are Mauritanian names. And I was writing those characters while living in Mauritania. And so I like those names, the way they sound. And I felt I never heard them in literature before. So I wanted to bring them in there, And so you have that. You have Ndevui and Kpindi, Sierra Leonean names. Namsa is a very West African name. It could be anywhere in Francophone. So those names come from the region, but they're not specific individuals.
Right. There's a really fantastic question here from someone named Column, who could be anyone, and it's about the plane that you saw, the plane that you saw from the sky that sort of was the inspiration for this narrative. And what he wanted to know was, if you could take that plane, that original plane that you saw, and you could land it anywhere in the world, where would it be? Or would you just keep it exactly where it is, where it is in our imaginations right now?
Well, I think if I could, it's a great question. Funnily enough, actually in the book, there's actually a moment where the 5 characters play a game like that. They decided, because they're being caught in the rain, they couldn't go out. So they decided to, Elimane, Namsa, Kpindi, Ndevui, and Kudimata decided to imagine where they would go if this plane were to fly. And all of them had their own different explanations. Now, if it was me, I'm not the characters, but if it was me in this particular scenario, I think I would start the plane and I will ask whoever my passengers are where they want to go, honoring the sort of equality that a little family does. They always share everything equally among. So I'll ask them, where does everybody want to go, and then take off and go. Yeah. That's
I would probably choose Sierra Leone.
No, I would just fly around and land right back, you know. Yeah.
Kelly was wondering, it's been 13 years since A Long Way Gone, which I did not realize. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, I feel like an old man hearing this.
I know. She's curious, how have you evolved as a writer in that time, would you say, since the publication of that memoir?
I feel like I've changed quite a bit. I mean, obviously, I believe that I've gotten more intelligent. If not, then I think I've wasted my time living in a way.
Yeah.
But I believe that for my first book, it came out of frustration to give context to a reality that most people did not know about, but were writing about and drawing the wrong conclusions. After I wrote that book, and I think I really realized the importance of story and the importance of writing about these almost forgotten places, you know, and opening a small window into people's imagination for that space, you know. And so I really started to think about writing through that. Like, how do I represent people like me who are not in literature at all? Like, I come from a small village in Sierra Leone where most people in Sierra Leone don't even know where it is. It needs to stay outside, you know. So I always thought to myself, you know, so how do I bring this knowledge that I gained from growing up in this part of the world, where I was told as a young person, and I believed it and I saw how that worked, that stories are medicine that you pour into a human being to strengthen them so that they can face life. And life would always try to break you, but the stories will be your medicine that are sitting almost like your antibiotics or antibodies for whatever life would throw at you. So I grew up with this belief. And so each time I wanted to write something in my growth as a writer, that's what I'm thinking. I don't only want to write stories that are well written, beautiful captures that might bring you in, but also stories that leave a little bit of medicine in you to remember that as human beings, we are each other's keepers. And how we function in this world should always be along those lines. So that's how I've really grown as a writer, with that message in all of my writings. So you can go to these amazing characters, but you always are reminded. You read a book of mine, you walk away feeling that you've not only read something beautiful, but that something has been added to your humanity in a way, you know. So,
I love that. And it's funny because knowing you, I understand how that belief that stories are medicine, that stories are how we understand who we are, how we understand our place in the world, our relation to other people. Stories are how we define the universe for ourselves, you know? I know that about you. And I wonder, is that what motivates a lot of the social activism that you do? I mean, we already mentioned the fact that, you're a UNICEF ambassador, that you work with Human Rights Watch. You and I, just for everyone to know, are part of an organization called Narrative 4 that precisely uses stories and storytelling as a way of transforming people's perception of the other. And you actually are starting together with the novelist Colin McCann, one of our favorite novelists, a new sort of artist network that's about using stories to create empathy. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, because I think, our idea is that, again, going back to the storytelling I was telling about, is that some of us have the luck in the world and the fortune to be writers who write books and people read it. But we are not the only carriers of stories that are important in the world. So how do we allow other people who may not write a book but have an important story to share in the world? How can they bring that? How can we allow people to walk in each other's shoes to build empathy? Because empathy requires work. It's not something that's just going to happen on its own. For example, what's going on right now, everybody is saying that, oh yeah, after this, things are going to change in the world. No, if we don't work on how we are right now, we're going to go right out the door and go back to the way we've done things. So really what we're trying to seize this moment to show people that, again, through stories, through learning about literature, truly we come to understand not only our place in the world, but also our usefulness in the world. So the Artist Network and Narrative 4 is really driven by this core message of how do you build a better human being through empathy, through allowing them to, through story, which is, as Colin put it, is the only democratic thing you have left in the world, really. How do you really use that to get people together beyond the stereotypes, beyond their feelings about each other, so they really get to understand truly who they are, you know? So that's a remarkable project that we're part of, yeah.
Well, if people want to learn more about it, you can Google narrative 4, the number 4, narrative 4. So Trevor, who's a big fan of yours, is asking what is always my favorite question, which is about your process, your writing routine, right? Like, can you describe it? Can you expand on it? Do you write from an outline? Do you write in the morning? What's your process of writing like?
I've always, when I've thought writing from time to time, young people always ask me, like, how can I be the greatest writer in the world? And I would always ask them, how many books did you read last month? And they said nothing. I was like, well, you need to start reading before you come back and ask that question. And students don't like it.
Twitter count? Is Twitter?
Twitter doesn't count. No, it doesn't count. Maybe if there's a link to a well-written article, we could kind of pass it up. But anyway, so I'm a writer, but I'm more of a reader. I love books, so I read a lot. So usually I'm always reading just to know what has been done, literary devices, what people have been done, just to expand my own imaginative landscape as well. Now, my process is basically I don't outline stories. For example, when I was working on Little Family, I did not sit down and outline. I saw that plane. I wanted to have some characters on that plane, and I basically started making notes. And I said, okay, there's a plane. That could be their home. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are their names? What are the gender? What are their ages? Where do they live? Who do they interact with? So I walk around about a year asking myself these questions and just making notes. I never try to sit down and plot and say, this will be the beginning, this will be the middle, this will be the end. Because I feel personally, once you do that, you limit the possibilities, the magic itself that happens when you're faithful to your characters, right? And the stories they tell through you. So I basically spend time thinking about my characters, and then one day I would just sit down after 6 months or a year, and I would just start writing. And the story would just come out of me. And mostly I will write at night. Anytime after 1 a.m. it's my favorite time, when it's really quiet. So I write from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. and then I'll take a little nap, get some coffee, and then I'll reread what I've written and try to make some edits. And then I would just continue. But once I start the story, I can't stop. It's almost like I need to get it out of my system in a way, And so that's my process, That being said, I'm not as disciplined a writer as I wish I am. In fact, when we had a pub date for Little Family, my editor asked me, so are you working on the next book now? I said, yes, I started already, because I knew you would ask me that question, So sometimes, it's good to have somebody behind me a little bit. But once I get going, then I'm very quick. But it takes me a bit to really just, because I want to inhabit the characters. I want to feel like them. I want to go into their world, think like them, emote like them. And it's funny, my wife sometimes laughs and says, when you're writing, when you're in that world, is the best time to ask you for anything, because you just say yes, so we can leave you alone. So that's my process, basically. So I do that. Yeah. And when I'm writing, I don't read when I'm really in the process of writing, because I want to just be in that space. I don't read anything. I actually watch some things really silly I do. I watch really old Kung Fu films, the ones that don't really have any plot lines whatsoever, It's just fighting, So when I go watch those and then I come back and do, so that's how I work.
There are plenty of American shows with no plot line and just plenty of fun. So you don't need to necessarily do old Kung Fu. This is actually, I just want to say, just to comment on what you said, because it's such an important lesson for young writers. And if there are, people who are listening to this conversation who are embarking on a writing career or are thinking about writing, what Ish just said is the single most important thing that you can get from this conversation, which is that stories are not about events. Stories are about people. They're not about things that happened. They're about people to whom things happened. And I think young writers so often spend so much time trying to plot out, you know, what happens and what happens next and how does this thing end. And you said it right. You start with the character, you start with people, you put them in a world, and then you let them do what they want to do. And you let them tell you what happens next, and they will. Yeah,
absolutely.
The best advice that I could give any writer who's out there.
Where are you teaching so I can sign up for a course?
Yeah, that's what I tell my students all the time, and they look at me like I'm crazy. They're like, "What? What are you talking about?" No, the book doesn't write itself. I write it, and you're like, "No, actually, you'd be amazed how much of a book writes itself." So just a fun story. A fun question from Doris Taylor. But of course, you're now an Angelino. You've gone so Hollywood-ish. You're just so Hollywood now that I feel like I need to ask you Doris's question, which is, are you open to? Have you thought about turning one of your books into a movie or a television show? Obviously, there was a lot of, A Long Way Gone had a lot of, interest in that kind of world. I think it may have even been turned into something. I know it was turned into like a documentary or something like that. But what Doris is asking, though, is really interesting. Not just, the process of how everything is becoming optioned into movies and television right now, but more importantly, her argument is that so many of the voices that we hear from Africa are either from Nigeria or South Africa, like as though those are the only two countries, right, in Africa. And her argument was it would be so interesting to see something authentic on screen that's from a different country in Africa. So in general, what are your thoughts on this idea?
No, I certainly agree. But, you got to give big ups to the Nigerians. They have the population, but also they have the intelligence and
they do good stuff.
They do good stuff. So it's not just that they're, So anyway, that being said, there have been, I live in Los Angeles now, but, I won't say I consider myself a Hollywood. I've been to some of those general meetings, and in the book world, somebody likes your idea, they buy the idea and you write it, right? And in Hollywood, you can go to all these lunches, and encouragement will kill you in Hollywood. They'll say, "Oh, you're great, we love you," and you're like, "And then what? Are we gonna do something?" So anyway, so I haven't been around that as much, but there's been interest in every book that I've written to make into a film. I have been very cautious because of what I said earlier, that I believe my stories or the things that I write, I consider them as adding value to humanity. And I wanted to, I'm not a filmmaker, but if somebody makes it into a film, I want them to approach it with that kind of thinking and the artistry that they will bring to it. I want my characters to still have their own agency, not just a Hollywood version of an African who waits to be saved by somebody from somewhere, So I've been really reluctant to allow that to happen because I'm still looking for the right people who have the right motivations. And I believe, like every art, if you do it really well, you will find the market, people would buy, and it will become a success. But if you do it just to make money and just to tell the story loosely the way, so I've been really reluctant to letting my stories go because of that. And partly it's because I also have children and I worry a lot about legacy. I don't want them to grow up watching one of my books on film that portrays who they are and what they look like as somebody who's an idiot or something. You know what I mean? So I don't try to. So I've been really reluctant to do that. But I'm interested, definitely, because I think that medium also reaches so many more people.
Yeah.
And it says so much. So if it's done really well, I mean, Reza, you know this. So you are in, so you can really do so much with it by opening people's eyes into certain realities about certain people that they had complete different points of view. So I'm interested in it, but I'm just very careful,
We only have a few minutes left, and this is a really big question for such a short amount of time, but it's such a good one that I feel like I would love to end with it, which is in the book, there's a lot of conversation that's had among the characters about the difference between living and surviving, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you this question is from Michelle. How important do you feel like that distinction is in the reality that we're living right now? Where we are sort of talking about simply surviving as opposed to living and thriving.
Yes. I think, in Little Family, this is why I was saying earlier, this book is really relevant to what's going on right now. One of the things that the five characters try to do, even though they are not in society and they're struggling all the time and they have to go out every day to find food, they've come to understand that their lives will never go to the normality that they used to know. So accepting the new normal in their life, in a way, allows them to live in that moment as opposed to waiting, which I think is the situation that most of us are in now. Everybody's waiting for things to get back to normal, but things will never get back to the normal that we used to know. And the quicker we adjust our brains and our behavior to that, the more you will enjoy your time at home,
Yep.
as opposed to just waiting. So the Little Family characters really know that. And so basically, they know how to survive, but they also know how to live in the simple moments they enjoy. For example, when they sit together eating just an apple that they split in 5 ways for each other, they imagine if they were somewhere in a nice restaurant eating, what would the apple taste like? So they're accepting their situation. They're not allowing the situation itself to become a burden, but they are finding a way to rise above it, but to accept it for what it is. So then they can find those solutions that can make them live through it every day. So every day when they go out, that's what they do. When they encounter different people in different society and their lives intersect with them, they have to decide what that means to their little family now, and how is that it's going to keep it together. It's going to separate it apart. So I think that's the lesson that I will learn. And personally speaking, as a human being, somebody who came out of a difficult background, I know very well that surviving doesn't allow you to dream. If you want to survive, you're only interested in the immediate sort of gain, But when you learn how to live, every moment becomes useful and what you do with it. For example, I was talking to some friends of mine. They were like, "Oh, this, and I said, can we get on a video call?" And we got on a video call with him. And he was in his pajamas. And I said to him, "Listen, man, that's one of the problems right there. You wake up every morning like you can't go anywhere, Wake up, take a shower with the finest soap you have, put on your perfume, wear your nice clothes, and then stay home. But at least you've trained your mind to think of a possibility, right? So this is what the Little Family does every single day. So that's the difference between surviving and living. Yeah.
As you say this, I realize that this is the first time in 2 weeks I combed my hair. So thank you. Thank you for
It looks good though. It looks good.
Thank you. I need a haircut, but what are we going to do? I just want to say that I love this book and I don't like anything. It's just, I'm a very difficult reader to please. And I think that this book is marvelous and I can't recommend it enough. Little Family by Ishmael Beah. There's a little blue button right there, you guys, that says purchase Little Family. You click that button, you get the book, you help Politics and Prose, you support Ishmael Beah, and you have an incredible reading experience at home at this time. Yeah, everyone's got it. Woo-hoo!
That's right.
Thank you so much, Reza.
Want to thank Politics and Prose. Want to thank Ishmael Beah. Alan, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, thank you both so much. This is just fantastic. So amazing. Beautiful conversation. It's such a pleasure to have both of you here and to celebrate, the release date of this beautiful book. I'm actually very hopeful that you're going to be watching plenty of kung fu movies to come, because that just means you're writing.
In the meantime, I'm going to go put my pajamas back on.
That's right. Yeah. I want to thank everyone that joined us as well. It's just been a fantastic event. Your patronage is what enables us to bring you programming like this, and we cannot continue to host these types of events without book sales to support them. So please support Ishmael and click on that little green button and purchase Little Family straight through our website. You can also, right up top, click the Politics and Prose button to see what events we have coming up. such as tomorrow we have Iris Krasnow and her book Camp Girls. It's at 7 p.m. And then Ben Sheehan with his book OMG, WTH, what does the Constitution really say? He'll be in conversation with Congressman Jamie Raskin. That's on May 1st at 7. So we have plenty coming up. Please go and purchase Ishmael's book. We appreciate y'all. Ishmael, Reza, thank you both so much.
Thank you, Reza. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
a wonderful
love you, brother.
question.
Take care.
Take care.
All right, y'all. Stay well read.
Bye-bye.